Rhetorical Quest.
We are going to talk about a very difficult thing in the study of communication, and that is communication and conflict. I think that every textbook from which I have ever taught uh, used Hocker and Wilmot's definition of what a conflict is, which is an expressed struggle between two interdependent parties who perceiving incompatible goals, scarce resources, and resistance from the other party in achieving their goals. There is no conflict if it hasn't been expressed. You can't sit there. You can have internal conflict, but that's because there's two parties within you, right? Unless there are two different people, you don't have conflict. They say it takes two to tango, and that's true. You don't have a conflict unless you have two people. So if you haven't expressed it, or there aren't two of you, no conflict. You have to perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, and resistance. Now, sometimes as we work through our conflict, we find out that we were wrong. We do not have incompatible goals. We do not have scarce resources, and there is no resistance from the other party. It was just the other party didn't think about it. That's the way it is. And so when we have all of these, though, you do have conflict. Now, one of the first things I want to make clear is that conflict is natural. We all have goals. There are scarce resources in many, many ways. And so we sometimes interfere with each other in reaching those goals. And it's just going to be something that happens. The fact that there's conflict in a relationship is not a bad thing, as long as it's done respectfully, with no, yelling, name calling, anything like that, no bringing up past conflicts, then it's a good thing. And it can even be a healthy thing because conflict is how we solve our problems. One tool that I have found to be invaluable in helping me understand where I am in a conflict and what I'm doing in a conflict and what kind of a conflict this is the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument. Now, it was actually in the studying for this particular video that I realized that Thomas Kilmann wasn't one person, it's two people, and there's a dash between them. So now I know that. So what this instrument does is it allows you to choose a conflict resolution style, or at least identify a conflict resolution style based on either assertiveness or cooperativeness. So let's just go ahead and start with the low assertiveness ones. If you're low assertive and low cooperation, you might just avoid conflict. You just might decide, I am just not going to fight. I'm not going to bring it up. We're not going to deal with this. And so it becomes a lose-lose. My probably go-to in most situations is a lose-win. I was always terrible at sports, and this is really the reason, is if you're going to make this a fight, I'm going to let you win. I just don't think that I'm going to get all involved and all emotional and all into this. If you're going to insist on winning, I'm going to let you win, right? And sometimes this is, and we'll talk a little bit in a bit about when this is really appropriate, but a lot of times I know I use it when it's not really appropriate. We talk about losing content still. I'm going to focus on compromising, which we also consider like avoiding a lose-lose, right? A lose-lose, because when you compromise, you both get a little of what you want, but neither side gets what they want. And so nobody wins, nobody gets what they want, and it is a loss for everybody. Competing is another strategy that we sometimes use in our conflict resolution. And that is just that I am going to win and the other person is going to lose. And I'm just going to keep going, keep fighting, keep insisting until I win. Right? And so when when you use this kind of strategy, it has to be something that you are really willing to give up a lot to win. You are really willing to do it. And of course, we have collaborating, which we call the win-win, right? Where both sides find a way to get everything they want. And in a lot of situations, this is what we should be going for. I'm going to focus really a lot on that as we go through the rest of this video. But there are situations where it's not really necessary. So I said before that some of these are sometimes appropriate resolution styles, besides just the collaborating, which is the best in most situations. They're all appropriate in certain situations. And one way that I've used to decide what is appropriate here is you can look at the high assertiveness as also being high task. The task, what you want to get done, is what matters. Low assertiveness, low task. Then cooperativeness, you could either say you are low relationship or high relationship. And depending on how important the relationship or the other person is to you, you might want to choose something that goes towards that side. So let's just go ahead and talk through this. When is it a good idea to compete? When is it a good idea to compete? When you have to win. When this is something where if the other person gets what they want, and you don't get what you want, it is going to be terrible, right? If you come to my house and you want to rob me, we are in a competing situation. I'm not going to be like, oh, how's there a way that you can rob me and I can still keep some of what I. No, 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 no. I'm going to win, right? Or you're going to kill me, right? And that's kind of the thing, because we don't have a good relationship. You're robbing me, right? And so when the relationship does not matter, that's the only and winning does. That's the only time you should compete. When the relationship doesn't matter, when the person with whom you're communicating or arguing, have your conflict, when that person does not matter, but the task or what you're trying to do does, that's when it's okay to compete. Sometimes it doesn't matter if you win. Just doesn't matter if you win. It's not that important to you, really. And also, the person doesn't really matter. So you're just not even going to talk about it. You're just not even going to have it. In fact, this almost gets to not having a conflict. Now, sometimes, the conflict starts to rear its head and you just go your separate ways. You're just going to avoid the conflict because that person doesn't matter to you. You don't care. And honestly, you don't care if you get what you want. It's not that important. You can avoid the conflict. Sometimes you don't care a huge amount about the task, but you do care a lot about the person. And so because you care a lot about the person, it's worth not avoiding the conflict, but going into the conflict and giving them what they want. This is my go-to in most situations. I tend to be accommodating because for the most part, people are more important than my goals in most situations. So I tend to go this way. Especially with my wife, who to me is like the most important person in the world. Is anything where we're going to fight about more important than her? No, it's not. So I tend to accommodate, even though that's not really the best, because there are ways that are just as high in relationship and also as high in assertiveness. And I probably should use those sometimes when I go to accommodating, because it's just my go-to. With my wife, with my daughter, with my closest friends, I tend to just do what they want. Sometimes the person matters a little, the task matters a little, but they're not either of them super important. then you can compromise. You know what? You want strawberry ice cream. I want chocolate ice cream. We can only afford one thing of ice cream. Let's go ahead and get the stupid Neapolitan, and somebody's got to deal with that vanilla somehow. I would like us to have chocolate, and so that we could get more. You would like us to have strawberry, but you know what? I guess I'm kind of glad to just get some ice cream. Compromise. It's okay. It's okay. The very best is collaborating. This is what you do when the topic really matters to you and the person really matters to you. So I said accommodating is my go-to. Why isn't collaborating my go-to? Because it's hard. Now, I have used it a lot in my life, especially when I am conscious of I should not be accommodating here. This is really too important. Then I'll go ahead and go to the collaborating. But it's the best. You get the win-win. Everybody ends up having their needs met. Everybody ends up achieving their goals. And that's the most important thing in the collaborative model. So how do we do this? How do we get to the win-win? Well, like I said before, this takes probably more work than any of the other styles. Right? There's steps you need to go to get to the win-win. And so how do we go through? What are these steps? Well, the first one is to identify your problem and unmet needs. I am underlining the word "your" here. I can give you a quote from Looking Out, Looking In by Adler, Proctor, and Manning, where they say, before you speak out, it's important to realize that the problem causing the conflict is yours. To take ownership and say, I have the problem. This is not, you are doing things and that's the problem. No, this is, I have a problem. And as long as you can come to it owning the problem, then you can start to move into collaborating. If you go in and you're putting the problem on the other person, you're not going to go to collaborating. There's a really good chance you end up competing, which is going to maybe get you what you want, but it will destroy the relationship in the process. And like I said, sometimes relationships don't matter. If you come to rob me, our relationship doesn't matter, right? Sometimes they don't matter, but if the relationship matters, you want to take ownership of the problem. The next thing you have to do is make a date. This is the big difficulty here, right? Because you want the problem to be dealt with now. And how can you deal with it now? You could compromise. You could compete. You could avoid the problem it's dealt with. You could accommodate. Those all solve the problem now, and it's one of the reasons that sometimes we don't go to collaborative problem solving, even though it's better, because you've got to make a plan and get to that plan. Now, if you're competing, sometimes it's a good idea to just jump in and kind of attack the person when they're not ready, right? It's not the way you do it. Not if you're going to collaborate, not if you're really going to solve the problems. You set up a time to say, let's figure out how we can solve this problem. You describe your problems and unmet needs. Describe what's going on. This is my problem. These are my unmet needs. And you might even say, and these are the ways that I feel like you're interfering with me getting my needs met. The other person is going to have a point of view. Right? They're going to have a particular point of view, and it's going to be different than yours. And sometimes you need to help that other person articulate what their point of view is and then consider it. A lot of times you get to about this point in the collaborative process and you realize they have really good reasons for the things you're doing. In fact, people almost always do. If somebody does something that just drives you nuts, they probably have a really good reason why they do it. If you talk to them, you find out why, maybe you can find a way that that reason can be met without the behavior, or maybe you can find out that you can make a little bit of an adjustment and allow them to do this particular thing and still get what you need out of the situation. So you've got to really do that. And then you've got to negotiate. You've got to negotiate the situation. So there's this guy, Thomas Gordon, and he wrote a book about parenting and parent effectiveness training. And he said that what you could do to negotiate a solution is you first identify the conflict, you figure out some possible solutions. I like this. It goes back to Dewey's standard agenda, John Dewey, who was an American pragmatist philosopher, really kind of interesting. He starts to talk about, okay, these are possible solutions. You go into brainstorming, you evaluate the alternative solution, and then you decide on the best solution. It is really close to Dewey's standard agenda. And so either one of those, Dewey's standard agenda also focuses on a problem rather than a conflict. So it says identify the problem, analyze the problem, take it apart, generate a number of solutions. Again, go in and critique and decide which solutions are doable, and then do it. That's Dewey's 5-part standard agenda. Gordon's has 4 parts, but they're really closely related. So I think that those can be good ways to negotiate a solution. You figure out what you're doing. Then once you've got the solution, you have to follow up with the solution. It's, again, time consuming. Say, okay, we're going to give this a week. And if it doesn't work, we need to sit down and talk about this again. And I know some people in my life where I've been really intentional about using collaborative problem solving. That's sometimes the area where people get hung up. I'm like, okay, we need to evaluate this in a week. They don't evaluate it in the week, or I don't evaluate it in the week. And so then we go back to old habits and the problems don't get really solved. But if you can go through these steps, there's a lot of times situations where you can see everybody's needs getting met. So I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear what you have done to solve conflicts better, maybe what your go-to conflict resolution strategy is, why you choose that one. Kind of what does that mean about how you feel about your relationships, and what does that mean about how you feel about the tasks. I think that's some really interesting things. I pointed out Gordon's model and how close that is to Dewey's model for figuring things out. Do you have a model that you've used to kind of help you do things collaboratively? I would love to hear anything about that. So if you're one of my students, I want you to do it in the discussion prompt where I've embedded this video, and you do it down in there. But if you're not one of my students, if you're just somebody watching this video on YouTube, I would love it if you would comment below and let me know what you think about these concepts in conflict resolution.